Okay, so the beginning of cell theory starts in 1665 with Robert Hooke. Robert Hooke was using one of the very first types of microscopes. It was not very sophisticated, and you could not see a whole lot of detail with it. But it was enough detail for him to be able to observe cells. In fact, he was looking at a plant cell, and so he used a microscope to observe plant cells. Was the first to use the term cells. He was the first guy ever to use the word cells in conjunction with these little tiny microscopic things. And again, all he really noticed was that these cells existed. He did not have a very sophisticated microscope, which means that he didn't see a whole lot of detail. About 8 years later, along comes a guy by the name of Anton van Leeuwenhoek. All right, so he doesn't look at plants; he looks at pond water. And again, Van Leeuwenhoek is using a very, very simple sort of beginning microscope, not very sophisticated at all. But what he does notice is that cells are alive. So he's looking at pond water. So he sees a bunch of little things swimming around, living their best life, eating, moving, etc. So that is his contribution to cell theory. Now, quite a bit of time goes by, okay? We have about 150-ish years that goes by, and people are still observing cells and they're still working on cell theory. But about 1838, a German by the name of Matthias Schleiden, he's a botanist, which means he studies plants, and he catalogs literally hundreds, if not thousands, of plants. And every single one that he noticed, part of his cataloging process is that he looks at them under a microscope. And what he notices is that all plants have cells. All plants are made up of cells. Okay. Around the same time, also in Germany, there is a guy by the name of Theodor Schwann. Now, I always remember that he's the Schwann because, like swan, it sounds like that, and a swan is an animal. Theodor Schwann is a zoologist, and he studies animals. Much like Schleiden, part of his study of animals is the fact that he goes in and he looks at their tissue samples under a microscope. And what he finds is that all animals are made of cells. Okay, so up until this point, between Hooke, Van Leeuwenhoek, Schleiden, and Schwann, we get the first part of the cell theory. The first part of the cell theory tells us that the cell is the basic unit of life and that all living things are made of cells. Okay, so that should sound familiar. And the reason why it should sound familiar is because that is one of our 8 characteristics of all living things, the fact that all living things are made up of cells. Now, again, you might have a single cell organism like Van Leeuwenhoek looked on in the pond, or maybe it's a multi-cell organism like your dog or a cat or a tree. Okay. Now, during this time, there's a lot of studying going on with cells, and the microscopes are getting better. So we're seeing more and more and more details. During this time, and it's not one person that is to that gets credit for it. It's like a bunch of people's work, so we don't necessarily give it to credit to one person. We find that the cells are the basic unit of function, and structure or in, excuse me, in all living things. So in other words, function, everything that living things do, structure, everything that living things are, right? All of your structures are what you are. All of your functions are what you do. All of your structures, all of your functions, everything you are, everything you do happens at the cellular level. We breathe, we digest stuff, we use energy. This all happens at the cell level. Cells build up tissues that make our organs and organ systems and our organisms. So everything we are and everything we do happens at the cellular level, and that is the second part of cell theory. Now, up until this point, and we're still about the mid 1800s, everyone's talking about cells, but nobody really knows where cells come from. And that's where Rudolf Virchow comes in. He, again, has a much more advanced microscope than Hooke or Van Leeuwenhoek or even Schleiden and Schwann have, because he is like the latest. This is like 1855. And he actually observes cells reproducing. Like literally no one knew where cells came from up until this point. But Virchow observes cells reproducing, splitting, making new cells. So Virchow comes up with the postulate that all cells come from other. Come from other cells. Okay, so that is the third part, and I'm just literally just going to copy and paste this because it's literally the same exact thing. That is the third part of our cell theory, ladies and gentlemen. This idea that all cells come from other cells. And again, that comes from Virchow. Now, again, everybody needs to answer this question. How do you think the invention of the microscope influences cell theory? This is for you to answer, and everybody is going to answer this individually, kind of like on their own. And everyone's going to answer to be a little bit different. But again, you have your information that you need from our information from today. And I am going to stop the recording because now I'll be able to add this